So, carrying on with the front wheel, what I did with the front axle was to increase the length of the threads on the spindle so that the cones could be centralised on the axle. Now with the axle centralised, I can place the wheel in the forks and have the correct amount of thread poking through each side. And holding it in place, I can measure for the spacers. These were made out of aluminium bar and knocked up on the lathe. A simple case of drilling down the centre and then parting off to the correct length. The second one was done in exactly the same way. A measurement was taken, hole drilled down the bar and then parted off. The spacers were then fitted to the axle and wheel fitted to the forks. Bit surprised that there's no steering lock on this bike, but then it is based on a bicycle. Next, the front mudguard. The mounting stays were put in place and the mudguard was offered up. It's a bit long, so a piece was cut off to make it more manageable. The threads on the stays were cleaned up with a dye, just again for ease of work. The piece of excess mudguard came in handy when profiling the strips for mounting the mudguard. The strips could then be fitted to the stays and the mudguards put in place. The holes could then be marked and drilled. I could then fit the mudguard and take a look to see how its profile fitted the wheel. In this case the radius was a bit long, so I had to modify the shape of the mudguard slightly. If the radius isn't too far out, it can be shortened by widening the mudguard. The old vise that I use is absolutely perfect for this, but you got to be careful. You can't hit it too hard, obviously, or you'll dent the mudguard. It doesn't take much to shorten the radius, so a gentle tap. Might take 2 or 3 goes, but build up to it rather than whack it. It's a lot closer now. Maybe one more go and I'll have it spot on. I still have to shape the ends of the mudguards, but I've taken it on and off enough times for today. I can do that when the tyre goes on the wheel. Just stand back one more time and make sure I'm happy. And before I forget, trim back the excess bits of spoke sticking out through the nipples. Next I thought I'd have a go at the petrol cap. So the first job here is to find out what thread they've used on the neck of the tank. Sad that I have to use a magnifying glass. Turns out to be 20 TPI. Next I measured the minor diameter of the thread. I'm going with brass for the cap. I think it will suit the gold pinstripe and the brass flywheel on the engine, and they did use brass caps on the petrol cans of those days, so I might get away with it. I'm using a slot mill instead of a drill. This will give me a flat base rather than the pointed end of the drill. And it's also simpler when boring it out to the minor diameter of the thread. I also remembered that the lathe is set up for metric threads for a job that I'm halfway through, and I didn't really fancy changing out all the change wheels just to do a small imperial thread, so I cheated. Sadly the camera angle for this part was wrong. It's an old method used by the gun trade and was used long before standardized threads came into existence. You catch the thread and let it basically feed itself into the work, gradually getting deeper and deeper, keeping it parallel and gradually working your way out to the desired diameter. taking the work out every now and then and trying it on the tank. With the thread now fitting, the outside shape of the cap can be machined in. The outside diameter was brought down, leaving a lip that can be knurled later. Most of this work was done by eye, just to make it look right, rather than working to dimensions. And the knurl was then put on. I then used a parting tool just to break the knurl into 2 rings, purely for decoration. Then the piece was cut off, reversed in the chuck and faced off. And then a dome was created freehand on the top of the cap, just to give it a bit of shape. And because I'm in the mood for a bit of hand turning, I finished it off by hand with a graving tool, a bull-nosed graving tool, creating a very nice smooth surface with no score lines in it. It's a bit like wood turning, but with metal. Again, harking back to the old gun trade and clock making trades. A final polish with emery paper. It's a bit bright, but hopefully it will have dulled down a bit by the time I finish the bike. Thanks for watching.